Hey guys, welcome to Office Hours with Bob Ross, episode number 32. In today's episode, what I'd like to discuss is practice. Now, I have done some previous episodes where I've brought up this topic of practice. Also, if you have followed me on social media, on YouTube, you know that this is something that I've addressed before. And today, what I want to discuss about practice is the practice dilemma. Now, there are some things that I've mentioned in regards to practice, some advice, tips, things that I've thrown out over the years to my students, people who just ask. And one of the things that I can say for sure is that I do not have a practice routine established. I do think that depending on the stage of development, depending on where you are in your life, that is something that is a necessity. It's something that's important. It's a way to really watch how you're progressing and to have a way to be accountable to yourself so you can make improvements. Now, I will say that when I advise students or throughout this topic, the things that I mentioned at some point I did go through and follow these ideas. So when I mention outlining a routine, when it comes to working on technique, the basics, with scales and arpeggios, working on repertoire, working on your tunes, your vocabulary, regardless of the style that you play, these are things that I have followed through to some extent throughout my years of development. But just like I mentioned before, the idea of being obsessed with guitar is what really took over for me in the beginning. And without having a private teacher, my focus was not dictated by someone's outline of what I should be working on that may have been able to help in the development, and really help me progress in a faster way. The focus was just more on what is of value, what I felt like was of value, what I felt like was something interesting and exciting for me. And I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. I think that regardless of how you start off on where you are, there may be times where this is going to hit, where you're going to maybe start with that type of guided practice, having a teacher, and then you break off into topics of things that interest you and you become obsessed, or the way that I had done it, which is become obsessed over particular things, and then later on realize that, hey, maybe having some sort of guidance and maybe creating a routine of addressing things that could make me progress quicker is a better fit at this time. So the practice dilemma is that it is there's multiple facets to it. And one thing for sure, over the last 20 plus years of playing guitar, that has definitely changed from my experience is the amount of things that you can become exposed to in any facet of what you like to do with music or guitar. With YouTube coming around, with the fact that there's streaming services and you can listen to anything at any time, you can, going back to the YouTube thing, you can at any point, you can look up any of these people and see exactly what they're doing And there are so many blogs. There's podcasts, just like this one. There's podcasts that you can listen to. There's tons of books. And especially going even, a little step further with the books, there's ebooks. So there are a constant barrage of material that you can access at any point. And that really becomes a hindrance. And that really creates a dilemma of, what am I going to do? Because at any point that you start following along with something, it's very easy to find yourself branching off into something else that's a little bit different, something else that you think is a little bit cool at the time. You notice that so-and-so's practicing this over here and you really enjoy how they sound, so maybe that's what you need to do. And then you listen to someone else the next week and you're like, well, maybe that's what I should be doing. The thing is, you need to find where the interest lies. You need to look for what is going to pique your interest. Now, before I go on with that, let me preface it actually with this. You need to be aware of what the big goal is and what it is exactly that you're doing, and how you're pursuing music. If this is a career choice, if this is something that you're doing that you want to make a living doing and you're taking this really serious, then the things that come up in your practice and where your focus needs to be is going to shift a little bit, as opposed to someone who's doing it for a hobby. And there's nothing wrong with doing it as a hobby, but just understand that if you want to put yourself in a situation where you want to go out and really immerse yourself into the lifestyle of pursuing music, then you're going to have to understand that there are things that, depending on the style that you're playing, there's certain expectations that are going to come, and you need to address those. And some of those things may not be the most entertaining things, but they are things that can help to progress your ability as a musician, as a player, as a guitarist. That way you can fit the situations, that you can accommodate the situations, and be able to make a living doing this. Now, if you're more of a hobby player, then certain aspects may not be relevant to you at all. To say that you want to, cover Eric Clapton tunes, and that's your thing, then I'm not so sure that your interest is going to lie in reading, doing reading on the guitar, and studying, all the multiple inversions of chords, or running through arpeggios. That may not be of interest to you at all, and by practicing that may deter you from wanting to play the guitar at all, and it's not enjoyable anymore. Now, I'm not going to say that those type of things can't be useful, because they definitely can be useful. It can open up the fretboard. It can open up your knowledge to the instrument. It can put you in a way of understanding the music more thoroughly. That way you can have limitations broken down to where you can express yourself on the instrument more and more. But if that's not your goal, if your thing is not to progress to that extent on the guitar, then your practice doesn't require that. So you do have to be aware of where you're going with what you're doing. You have to have clarification of where you plan to take your music, as far as how you want to pursue it. And a sort of related topic here. I mean, we're still talking about practice here, but another dilemma that's occurring right now, and I felt it, and I think a lot of musicians have felt it, where we are currently in a state of not really having many gigging opportunities. There is something to sitting down with the instrument and exploring things that you felt were weaknesses in your playing because you have more time to do so. But in some respects, I mean, if your main thing, your whole music, is, your career in music is performing, then to work on some of these things starts to take on a little different feel, because at least for me, when I'm working on certain things, I start to think, well, yeah, this would be great because it could help me to advance. And then when things at some point, hopefully, allow for gigging to come back, live performances to be, more on a regular basis, like they used to be, at least in my case, then I'll be set up. I'll be ready to go. However, without having that drive, for some people, not having that drive is a real difficult dilemma. If you don't have a gig that you're working towards, then you start to consider, well, why would I practice it? There's something in the brain that just starts to click into, this not being a necessity. Now, there's another part of it, though, where it is interesting. The things that you're working on does have an interest, it captures your attention. So it very well could be that thing that helps to motivate the practice, So sticking to a routine at this point, which is something that over the past few years, I for sure have not stayed with a routine, because I'm always thinking that I need to work on this, or this, and oh wow, I just had this gig that I just booked, so now I need to work on this and put this together. Where that's not happening, a routine is something that I'm looking more and more towards. And speaking a little more in depth here about the routine, I'm sure that there's other players, other musicians, other hobbyists out there that can identify with what I'm saying, in that when I think about guitar has become, for over 20 years, guitar is something that's, synonymous with me. It's something that's always there. And every single day, my guitars are around. I pick up my guitars, and it feels like if I don't practice or play the guitar, have the guitar in my hand throughout the day, then I am doing something wrong, because I have identified as a guitarist / musician. So if I don't constantly do something with music throughout the day, then it feels like I'm turning my back on the guitar or music. And that may sound a little bit odd for some, but I do think that there are those out there listening now that you can relate to this. It feels like I'm just turning my back on music and the guitar, and if I take any time away from the instrument, then I fail. I failed at, I'm not a guitar player anymore. I'm not a musician anymore. I'm none of these things. So there's a certain mindset to it, which on one hand is great, because you have that identity which pushes you to want to really dive in and figure out the instrument and push yourself. On the other hand, it becomes an obsessive aspect of your personality where you can't turn it off. I can't turn that off. I mean, if I work on it, if I really want to turn that obsessed attitude about it off, I imagine that I could work on it and do it, but I'm not really wanting to do that. So when I think about my practice, and I think, well, for example, I'll throw out a couple of things that I'm been currently revisiting or working on, is going back through, taking a look more into, and this is, for some of you, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, it's cool. I won't go too deep into it, but it's pretty surface level, just basic things as far as, I'll usually work on some kind of technical aspect, get my hands warmed up, like 4-finger exercise based things and picking hand type stuff to get my fingers moving, my hands moving. Sometimes feels a little sluggish when I'm first picking up the guitar in the morning. So I like to warm up my hands a little bit with that. And then I go off into working on, right now I'm working on melodic minor scales. And if you're familiar with how I see the fretboard, there's 5 areas to the fretboard, and I'm working through all 12 keys in each area, doing melodic minor in thirds, and working on it in the 4 directions approach of, I'm going to play my thirds in ascending patterns, then I'll do descending, then ascending, descending, and then descending, ascending. And this takes some time. And as far as a metronome marking, I usually don't turn it on right away. As I go, if I feel like there's something I really want to accelerate in or push myself a little bit more, then I will. And as I go through each area of the fretboard, I may up the tempo a bit, maybe 10, 15 beats per minute. But I usually start pretty slow, 60, 70, or 80, running eighth notes. So I work on that, and some of this seems like it may be dispersed a little bit too much and not really focused, but on these type of things, these are just, basically just reviewing over things that I've worked on before, just getting it under my fingers again, and I treat it in some sense as a warm-up, a continuation of the four-finger exercise warm-up. Then the next thing I'll do or have been doing is going back to my major scales and just playing fourths, also using the four directions approach. And depending on what's going on, what I need to do during the day or how the kids are, if I need to put down the guitar, because usually practice is always interrupted at some point. That's just the nature of the way life is right now. Then, I'll stop, take a little break, and then I'll come back and maybe I'll work on, depending on the mindset I'm in, depending on how much time I feel like I have, I may start to work on improvisational-based limitations in my practice, try to get right into that in case my time runs out and I can't get to some things. If I have more time, then I'll insert a few other things. But I want to really get into the limitations of improvisation, like these, what I refer to as limited creativity. Limited creativity. And what I'll do is I'll set myself up to play a tune and use limitations on it, being that I may only use chord tones. I may use a certain rhythmic idea over a tune. I'll tell myself I'm going to play long phrases or shorter phrases, play the tune in all eighth notes, or I'll slow it down a bit to really try to work on 16th note lines. I'll walk through the tune using quarter notes, or I'll play through a tune and just work on harmonizing the melodies that I create over it. So I usually like to get to that, and sometimes I'll throw in a reading component as well. So again, if I have more time, more things will come into play there. But at this stage, what I'm getting to is that the overall premise is that there's so many things and so many ways that you can go with this. And what I really find is that if you have a guided way and you have someone that can help you if you feel lost, then do it. But at some point, you're going to have to stop looking constantly for, how do I practice this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And you come up with something, stick with it. Stick with it for some of us. I think it's difficult to even stay with something for a week or maybe even 2 days. Can you come up with some things that you need to work on, isolate out, and work on it for 2 weeks or a month? Then put it down. Then move on to something. You got to be careful about the idea of wishing or hoping that you can master everything. You're not going to. You're always going to come back, and there's going to be new ways to see it, new approaches that you may have with some of the material that you're working on. For example, when I'm working on fourths, I go back and I'm coming up with ideas. I'll write out. That's the other thing I've been working out, is I'll write out ideas based on the intervals of fourths over changes, because I want to implement that into my playing. It's something that I like, so I'm going to implement that into my playing. So writing out ideas over tunes that I'm working on, great way to do it. Stick with it for a while. Really try to stick with it. Get down some ideas, and then if you really want to stick with it for another 2 weeks, a month, then do it. Otherwise, change it up a little bit. Keep things rotating in your practice. When you come back to some of these items, you're going to notice that your insight may be a bit different, and you may find ideas that you didn't realize before, ways to use these things that you didn't have before. As your mind expands, as you're working on these things, you will find new ways to apply what you're working on. So for all of us, including myself, any of us that have a hard time, again, going back to practice dilemma, so many things out there. The other aspect being that just saying I'm going to stick to a certain period of time and that's it feels very limiting. But if you look at it, grabbing the guitar throughout the day and not really focused on anything, maybe kind of fun and feel like you're doing something, maybe it helps your ego beyond that. I'm not sure there's much result. I mean, at least you're picking up the guitar. I guess you could look at it like that. So to wrap up, just focus on a few things. It's a challenge for me. I think others face that challenge as well, but it's a challenge. But let's all try it. Any of us that experience that dilemma, pick a few things, go deep into the subject, really try to figure it out. Give yourself some time to really understand it. Quit chasing everything that you see or hear. Jot it down. If you find something interesting, an idea, a concept, jot it down, put it into the rotation. All right, before I go, I just want to remind you guys that I do have lessons and courses available on musicallessons.com/Bob Ross. Check that out. There will be a link in the show notes. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Leave a rating. It helps to, hopefully get other people to find this podcast. If you think maybe your friends or enemies, if you have any, that they may enjoy this. If you want to send the podcast, share the podcast amongst your friends, family members, please do that too, if you think they'll find it useful. Otherwise, I want to thank all of you guys for listening, and join me again next time for Office Hours with Bob Ross.